man who's done probably more deals in the banking industry than anybody, Raj. I know you won't say that, but it's true. Why do you like this deal if you do?
Because there is an inherent industrial logic to the transaction. There is a need for scale. There is a need for consolidation. And nowhere is that need greater than in wealth management. I think there is also a recognition, quite correctly by Morgan Stanley, that diversification is valuable and that being able to add revenues in what I would call an asset-light way is very helpful.
We have seen some, obviously Morgan Stanley leading in terms of the strategy with the acquisition of Sullivan Smith Barney years ago in parts, following it up here. What about this idea of a culture clash that E-Trade and Morgan Stanley, very different organizations, perhaps don't fit well together?
That's a question ultimately of integration management. If you go back long enough, you can see a culture clash at Morgan Stanley, of course, with the Payne-Weber deal.
Dean Witter.
I'm sorry, Dean Witter, you're right. It can happen, but it can also be managed. And I suspect that James Gorman, who really knows this area and is a very excellent people person, will figure that one out.
It was interesting, of course. They use stock in part because they can't use cash because of CCAR and the federal regulate or the oversight from the Federal Reserve that won't allow them to use as much if they want to continue to buy back stock, which then goes to the larger banks, Raj, which are really, they can't do big deals, right? I mean, they're cut off from doing a large banking merger, the likes of the consolidation of which you advised on so often during the 90s and early aughts.
Quite correct. The very largest banks, the big three, are all limited by a national deposit cap, and they're all over it, B of A, JP Morgan, and Wells. But they can do other types of transactions which don't involve deposits, such as asset management.
Is the pattern we're seeing right now in M&A a recognition that structurally low yields, programmatic trading, and deflationary commission structures are not going to revert?
I think that's right, and that puts the pressure on to engage in consolidation transactions, because by increasing your scale, reducing your costs, you can buffer all these external factors, which are really a potential very strong headwind in this area.
And do you give Morgan Stanley credit for seeing it either more clearly or earlier than their rivals?
I give them credit for having a vision that this is where they want to be. It's right for Morgan Stanley. It may not be right for anyone else, but it is right for them.
What do you think about Goldman Sachs, Raj, and their efforts, particularly as it's a focus on the consumer? It's a nascent effort, but one that's not unimportant in terms of that institution and the significant change that seems to be undergoing.
Again, I think they have made a decision, and I am sure with a lot of care and research, that this is an area which they can serve and serve well. They clearly have a century-plus long track record of figuring this out, and I suspect they will do just as well with the consumer as they have done with the institution.
You know, E-Trade's a name we talked about 20 years ago in a much different chapter of the markets. But now with zero commissions, there's data coming out that retail investors are trading with more frequency because it's free, essentially.
Sure.
I wonder what kind of implications you think that has for M&A, if we're truly in an era where mom and pops are getting back in the market.
Well, I think that is a positive, and it's your earlier question, the ability to envision that at an early stage and recognize it and capitalize on it rather than retreating from the area. Maybe it's the time to move forward.
And finally, Raj, do you expect to continue to see more consolidation in this asset management / wealth management sector?
I do, for all the reasons that have motivated Morgan Stanley. I think more generally we're going to see consolidation in financial services. And The critical element here, which I think has been largely overlooked, is why scale is so important today. It's always been thought of as a back office issue, technology and controls. Now it's front office. How do you market services and products? How do you deliver services and products? And that's where scale is so critical.